Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Rollins Parker. I am the outgoing president of the Net Impact Club graduate chapter here at Kenan-Flagler. On behalf of our club, the undergraduate chapter, as well as the Center for Sustainable Enterprise, we'd like to welcome you all to the talk, The Epic Merger, Ecology and Entrepreneurship, by famed eco-writer John Thompson. John is the author of The Environmental Entrepreneur, as well as a Knight Journalism Fellow. And in addition to ghostwriting a number of other books, he has written a variety of magazine articles, annual report copy, and speeches for many Fortune 500 companies, including IBM, Coca-Cola, the Southern Company, as well as for magazines such as Time and Fortune, Money. Through all of this writing, he has honed the following thesis: the only realistic solution to sweeping ecological decline is the conversion of consumer tastes to environmentally intelligent technologies, products, services, processes, and practices. I look forward to hearing about that today, and I ask you all to join me in welcoming John Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you, young lady. The name again? Rollins Parker. Thank you so much for a very generous introduction. Good morning, class. Great to see all your faces out here. I'm telling you. Let me take a moment to tell you a little bit about the book, The Environmental Entrepreneur. I was talking earlier to my dinner or lunch guests, and The Environmental Entrepreneur, there's not a desk out here where you're going to be pressured to go buy my book. It's been out of print now for years. I wrote the book 20 years ago. Statistically, it's outdated. Conceptually, it's as solid today as it has ever been. And it was all written to get the entrepreneurially inclined, excited about making money, cutting deeply into environmental problems 20 years ago. And I can assure you that being ahead of the times, particularly 2 decades ahead of the times, is as bad from a business point of view as being behind the times. So get your timing right. The book has continued to live. 20 years later, I find that what the business community is finally catching up. And that's very gratifying for me. So that's the story of the book. And the book, I sold a few thousand copies. I made a little bit of money. It developed for me a minor guru's reputation in the arena of environmental enterprise. And and interestingly enough, it's begun to finally come together, and which is a great thing to see. I want to thank the good dean, Dr. Jim Dean, for the invitation to speak with you, and Kathy Dennis and Becky Naples for the hard work they put into this presentation. I'm truly honored and delighted to be on this very special campus. I want to thank my cherished friend, Charles S. Ackerman here, for planting the seed that's led to this visit. Charlie and I have known each other for 35 years. We've traveled the world together. We've spent countless hours solving the world's problems. And so this adventure is a continuation of the kind of relationship we've always had. His connection to the University of North Carolina and the business school are long held and quite distinguished. Businessman in residence, 1986. Advisory board of the University of North Carolina, 1982 to 86. Alumni Merit Award, 2004. Advisory board of the University of North Carolina Business School, 1987 to present. Charlie's a guy that took his education here and went out into the world, and he knocked them dead. I wish for all of you the success that he's earned. And if you get a chance, I hope you can spend some time with him. He's a very interesting man. Before moving on, I want to thank those of you sitting here before me and compliment you on the wise use of your time. You're smart to be here. And not because of me, but because of the subject matter of this presentation. Frankly, I wish a far more eloquent and accomplished speaker was delivering this message out there in Kenan Memorial Stadium filled with your peers. The topic we talk about here today is just that important. It's all about you students and your futures, the jobs and careers you will settle into, the families you will have, the world you will live in. For the last half century, the adults of the day have left the environmental problem to the next generation to deal with. 3 generations later, today's young people like the students here before me, are no better prepared to change the dynamics of ecological decline than were their grandparents. It's not your fault. You were never taught what to do or how to do it. Neither were your parents or your grandparents. Consequently, the responsibility for saving the environment and saving yourselves in the process has fallen to you. Your forebears let you down. I, for one, apologize. So you and your peers are left to shoulder the burden of fending off the consequences of ecological decline. The good news is that A, there's time to limit the losses, and B, you're quite capable of turning this beast around. But not with the strategies and the tactics that have been deployed in the name of environmental preservation since the modern environmental movement emerged from the old hippie subculture of the 1960s. The old ways have not worked, and they cannot work going forward. Clearly, government, in concert with environmentalists, can't solve the environmental problem. 50 years of nonstop trying proves the point. Government represents all constituents, industrialists and environmentalists alike. The best that can be achieved are compromise solutions that fall short of what's needed. Environmentalists have always been too fragmented and suspicious of business to solve the problems they champion. Business was and business is the one institution on earth with the instinct and the wherewithal to convert major environmental problems into markets of solutions. But business can't throw its resources at vague opportunities with no clear prospects for a profitable return on investment. And that's as it should be. Consumers could solve that problem dramatically if they created resounding market demand for the products and services of legitimate environmental solutions. But for all their collective power, consumers don't know how to protect their own best interests in the marketplace. Thus, do today's young adults stand last in the line of the next generation to solve the environmental problem. I'm one of those who believe that the buck stops here. There's not another 20 years for the process to get going, in my opinion. The no-nonsense environmental education of this generation of tomorrow's leaders must begin now. But who's going to teach them? And what must they learn? In the first instance, I say to you, why not start here with the Kenan-Flagler Business School? As for what the students must learn, Mr. Ackerman and I have come to suggest an answer. Speaking for both of us, I'm here to propose a course of study that teaches aspiring businessmen and women, entrepreneurs, investors, and managers how to advance environmental preservation with for-profit ventures that cut deeply into one or more of society's array of environmental problems. I'm here to propose a course of study that teaches students how to preserve the environment with consumer-powered market demand for ecologically intelligent alternatives to polluting technologies, products, services, processes, and practices. I propose instruction that teaches students how public policy can bring the vast resources of the free enterprise system to bear on the environmental problem while protecting society against ecological decline. I propose a course of study that negates the political and ideological entanglement that permeates modern environmentalism. Conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, business and environmentalists, all can come together comfortably in a market-based business context that creates jobs, produces entrepreneurial wealth, pays taxes, and continues the good life here on earth far into the future. The curriculum I propose crosses academic disciplines to give business students enough of a frame of reference in ecology, environmental chemistry, biology, and consumer science to be effective green problem solvers. It would distinguish the Kenan-Flagler Business School among all universities in the country as an avant-garde educational institution of the highest, most relevant kind. And it would distinguish Kenan-Flagler Business School graduates in the proposed curriculum as foremost in the field of environmental solutions. As you may have gathered, I'm not talking here about more environmental awareness. That has never been enough to actually solve the environmental problems. The environmental education started in America's secondary schools in the 1970s has not translated into more effective adult preservationists. Society today still does not understand the environmental problem and what it means individually, especially for the next generation. I'm not talking about more environmental studies either. At the end of the day, it does not prepare graduates for the critical roles the public has to play if environmental ruin is to be avoided. I'm not talking about environmental science, though it's vital to the understanding of the problems that have to be solved and the formulation of the solutions that have to happen. The course of study I'm talking about deals with serious environmental problem solving, driven by the profit motive and ecological survival. I'm proposing nothing less than an epic merger of ecology and entrepreneurship. The time has come for that. The students in this room and your peers across the country and beyond have come to a sea change in modern human history. The changes are both economic and ecological. Some of them are familiar to you, some are not. Some are already occurring, and others lay just off there past the horizon. The upshot of these developments is that the newly old, pre-2007 ways of doing things simply has to change. New and smarter technologies, products, services, processes, and practices that serve us and don't harm us have to become the norm. I call it the time of the great reconfiguration. Economically, we have all experienced the unraveling of the economic order that drove America's astounding surge in wealth and prosperity following World War II. Not since the Great Depression has there been such a fracturing of the status quo and a questioning of which way forward as we are experiencing today. As the public slowly realizes that those pre-2007 dynamics are no longer reproducible in today's increasingly automated global economy, the workforce, especially the young, mill about searching for the next big thing. Where will the new jobs and careers come from? The answer is unclear. In this economic environment, there's a growing sense of the entrepreneurial imperative. The general perception that the U.S. is going to have to reinvent much of its economic underpinnings. If the old days, pre-2007, are not going to return, the U.S. will have to fill the void or suffer the consequences. The need for innovation and fresh business thinking has not been so apparent since the 1930s. In the midst of these developments, a strong case can be made that the most fertile ground available today for the seed of entrepreneurs and businesses is the environmental field. Recent strong growth in green jobs bolster that assertion. Consumer demand for green products and services indicate that the marketplace for environmental solutions is firming up. Now, to this, add in the economic drivers associated with ecological change, and the case for developing educated environmental entrepreneurs gets far stronger. Consider for a moment the ecological legacy awaiting today's college students. By mid-century, 2050, you will be what today is thought of as middle age, somewhere in your late 50s. Your children will be in their early 30s, and you may have grandchildren in elementary school. Trust me, it'll happen to you. By then, the planet's sea level will have risen 3 feet or more, and there is absolutely nothing science and government can do between now and then to change that outcome. The responsible scientific community forecasts that those higher seas will swamp much of Miami, Florida, the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area, southern Louisiana, including New Orleans, San Francisco Bay, and other coastal cities in the U.S. and abroad. Beaches and beachfront property will be completely redefined. Property will be lost on a grand scale. Many people, entire population centers, will be turned into environmental migrants searching for higher ground. Dikes and levees will try to hold back the water, but otherwise there is absolutely nothing anyone can do to change these developments. Doom and gloom? Absolutely not. It's an economic driver of the most powerful kind. We, the people, have to do something. Seriously. A 3-foot sea rise is not the end of that story. Things can get a lot worse. We know what causes global warming, and we know how to scale it back dramatically. Consumers will buy good solutions. We're not suicidal. Business just has to deliver the goods and the services. Society just has to hold global warming up as a target for the business class to aim at. In many ways, now is like the 1890s when electricity had just shown its possibilities, when automobiles began to hint of another era, when a whole new economic order began to separate from the old one. It was a launching pad time. Today is a launching pad time. Let's look at some further economic drivers. Rising temperatures will likely dry out much of the land mass in the southern tier of American states and produce raging storms and rivers society hasn't had to deal with in the modern era. And the ranks of environmental migrants will grow. And there's nothing science and government can do to spare you those problems in 2050. This is not doom and gloom, it's a challenge. The solutions to this problem are the same as the solutions to rising seas, and so are the business opportunities. We, the people, have literally altered the very chemistry of the air we breathe. What's out there today is not what humanity grew up on. The current carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere is 38% higher than pre-industrial days, and the highest it has been in 400,000 years. Methane, the most potent of greenhouse gases, is at its highest level in 400,000 years. By mid-century, both will be unavoidably higher, and nothing can be done to fix that problem. Everything on Earth is made of 92 primary elements. At last count, mankind has made another 26 synthetic chemical elements. Thousands of new chemical compounds have been made from these basic building blocks. They are now part of the air and the water and the soil and us. And they never were before in the 120,000-year history of modern man. Deforestation has removed 40% of the photosynthesis capacity of the planet. And photosynthesis, you will remember, produces the oxygen we need to survive. Today, burned coal dumps more than 75 tons of raw methyl mercury into the air we breathe every year. Once emitted into the atmosphere, the mercury is widely dispersed over the landscape and circulates for years. Airborne mercury concentrations in the atmosphere today are 3 to 5 times greater than the pre-industrial era. Mercury is the second most poisonous substance known to science, exceeded in toxicity only by plutonium. With all this foreign material wafting around in our midst, it shouldn't be surprising that every man, woman, and child on the planet carries around in our flesh and bone trace amounts of cellular trash picked up by simply breathing the air, drinking the water, eating the food, or drawing nourishment through the umbilical cord prenatally. That trash, an invisible tributary of modern man's waste stream, is comprised of man-generated mercury, lead, cadmium, and other heavy metals, pharmaceuticals flushed into the water supply, and all those synthetic chemical compounds that didn't exist prior to World War II. Stuff like PCBs, DDT, dioxins, phthalates, bisphenol A, antidepressants, hormones, antibiotics, and on and on. It's in us, all of us, at the cellular level, and it's likely to be worse for you in 2050. Medical science isn't sure what all this means yet, but there are some sobering suspicions. Female puberty taking place in 8 and 9-year-old children, obesity, breast and prostate cancer, Parkinson's disease, autism, doom and gloom, not when it can be fixed. Something has to be done, and we have the resources and the know-how to do it. Government can only do so much. Business has to do the heavy lifting. Consumers will make the markets when they understand the problem. We, the people of planet Earth, are close to running out of fresh, potable water. On a planet that's more than 70% water, only 2.5% is the fresh variety. The greatest part of that is tied up in the planet's ice caps and glaciers. And we know what's happening there. Yes, it's melting and running into the sea, there to turn salty and unusable. By 2025, 13 years from now, some 40% of the world's population will be living in countries with chronic water scarcity. And many parts of the U.S. are not immune to that, including our home state of Georgia. It makes you looks like desalination plants are a serious environmental growth industry. But keep this in mind. The process requires inordinate volumes of electricity to produce fresh water. And given the energy model that drives our economy, that means a lot of burned coal residue. And we already have too much of that. By the way, a conventional coal-fired electric power plant uses 2.2 billion gallons of fresh water every year. Something has to be done here, sooner than later. All the products, services, and know-how to solve the problem are in place. Consumers just have to learn what to do. Business just has to seize on the opportunity. We, the people, are hard into snuffing out wild ecosystems and the creatures that live there. According to leading biologists like Dr. E.O. Wilson, that's the one wound to the biosphere that cannot be reversed. Ecosystems make the air, build the soil, produce the food chain, render the water palatable and bountiful. It takes 500 years to make an inch of topsoil, eons to reclaim a desert. Dr. Wilson and many of his colleagues contend that the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth has begun. We can shrink from that, or we can start doing something about it. So there's a threshold in which college students of the day now stand economically and ecologically. Water conservation simply has to happen on a major, sophisticated scale, or else. Therein lie great business opportunities only flirted with to date. Environmentally educated business students are natural beneficiaries of this development. Decentralized solar and wind power has to happen because we are killing ourselves tiny degrees at a time with the old energy model. Therein lie great business opportunities. Some big players are finally working out the right cost recovery and pricing formula. Other bigger players will have to follow, and the shift to real sustainable electricity generation is finally started. But there are few well-prepared businessmen and women in the marketplace to speed the process. I say bring on the educators. The energy efficiency makeover business has to blossom because nothing saves money and reduces pollution quicker and more surely than an intelligent recalibration of electricity usage. Therein lie terrific business opportunities. A few strong players are emerging, but the market has scarcely been touched. Woe is us for the lack of keen-eyed, knowledgeable green businessmen and women. Urban agriculture has to take off as a serious business because it makes too much sense as both a moneymaker and a pollution reducer. Lots of people in far-flung markets nibble around the edges of this concept, but no big players have materialized so far. So the business waits, and the environmental problems grow. Waste plastic and glass recycling sit there mostly dormant with many good markets to sell to because the entrepreneurs don't yet see the picture. Hello? Anybody interested in making $1 million? If every home, business, and institution across the country are candidates for the solar energy additions, rain harvesting systems, energy efficiency makeovers, and other green property improvements, and I believe they are, then environmental banking at the community level has to happen. Therein lies serious banking business hardly recognized as the ecological damage rolls on. Any of you going into the banking industry out here? If so, remember this presentation, right? When few communities have an extra $50 million or so to build a new sewage treatment capacity, it has to happen that far less expensive natural wastewater treatment companies spring up around the country. The technology and the biology are perfected. The end product, clean, potable water, is as good as, if not better than, conventionally treated water. A few good players have distinguished themselves so far in this business. Smart MBAs could have a field day in the arena. White roof designers and installers have to show up on the hot new business venture screen because the technology makes too much sense. The cost savings are too real. The market commercially and residentially is so big and so ripe, the profit potential so attractive, but too few knowledgeable business people see the opening. These are but a few of the opportunities awaiting the well-schooled environmental business graduate. To me, there's no pie in the sky here. It's all opportunity. In these days and times, and at the age and stature of the students in this room, these are opportunities well worth pursuing as careers. With that, I'll end my remarks, and I would love to hear what you've got to say and any questions you might have. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Thank you for coming today. I am doing a joint degree right now with an environmental management program, and I think I understand what you're saying when you say that what you're considering as important is not a full focus on environmental studies or environmental science, because you're not necessarily going to get that mix for business students. But could you go on a little bit more understanding environmental and ecological issues for business students?
Well, I hope I have not misled here. Environmental studies, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. It's burst upon the scene here. You guys are way ahead of the posse on environmental studies and sustainability. I got to tell you, I learned this program here at the UNC is 12 years old. What's happened here because of UNC and Oberlin colleges and some others, universities all around the country have jumped into environmental studies programs, and they're great. I'm fine with them. A lot of schools have gone into a more demanding environmental science curriculum, which is huge and very basic to the requirements to really solve environmental problems. But my position has always been that the only body of people out there that can really solve this problem is the business community. So you take your environmental studies, you take your environmental science studies, and you marry it to business. You marry it to business. There's this huge chasm that's evolved over the decades between the business community and environmental problems. Everybody in the environmental arena has to deal in 501c3 nonprofit corporations because there's a lot of barriers to really get in the real business. Environmental, social entrepreneurship. It's great stuff. I want to see you pull it further. I want to see you take environmental studies further. I want to see you take environmental science further. I want to see you take social entrepreneurship further. I want you to get in the business community and drive things. And you guys are getting a wonderful education here in business from a first-class business school. You clearly have interest in environmental problems. And I say to you, boy, really start thinking where you could go with this thing. And when I wrote this book 20 years ago, I had to create a database I called ESIM, Environmental Solutions Identification Matrix. And what I did is I started working backwards from environmental problems. I took all the environmental problems out there and I wrote them in a box. And it's really curious when you start doing that, you got to ask the right question and pose the right problem. Then if you work backwards off of that, what causes the problem? What are the manifestations of the problem? What does it look like? What are the solutions? Who's out there delivering the solutions? When you get down to that level, turns out there aren't many people at all out there delivering those solutions. So you got big problems, legitimate solutions, and you got no practitioners. You don't have enough practitioners. I think they're left and right of to what I would love to see happen here, and I'm most impressed with what I've heard, and I must tell you, I was not aware of the depth and the extent that is of the environmental sustainability mentality and approach here at this wonderful university. But I would love to see you get in the business of, in the real profit-making business. Now, there's two sides to that equation. You guys are the one half of it, the business side. The other half is the consumer side of it. Business cannot get into this environmental solutions business unless there's markets out there strong enough to warrant the investment. That's a consumer function. That's the housewives of the world. You know, 70% of the wealth in this nation is controlled one way or another by women. A lot of you women wouldn't agree with that, but you know, that's the numbers. So, and I think they've always been left out of the equation. But to get into the consumer education, which is a function of entrepreneurship, you got to educate your market. I always thought Rush Limbaugh did a tremendous job in educating his audience. You can educate your audience. There's all kinds of ways to educate your audience. So if a huge effort is made to educate consumers so that with their normal purchasing decisions, they start building markets, then if there's those entrepreneurs will find them. You don't have to go publicize it. You don't have to write a book about it. If the consumers get savvy, then All things are possible. All things are possible. We caused our own environmental problems. You guys are going to bear the brunt of it. And because they're man-made, they can be man-solved. A classic case in point to me is a muscle car. Now, it's not a term you hear much anymore, but I always shudder when I hear Americans just love their muscle cars. I'm thinking, that's a marketing initiative started way back in the old days and back when I was a kid. And I'll tell you, the same marketing disciplines could make a small 60-mile-an-hour car the cool car. So all environmental problems, I'm telling you, are marketing problems. This is your business. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm interested in consumer education. Can you say a little bit more about what you consider savvy? Is it changing human behavior to make choices for the greater good? That seems like a tough nut to crack.
I think it's got to come down to each person individually. Why? Forget my politics or my ideology, if I'm the consumer you're talking about, geez, my children's got problems here. Asthma's rampant. I mean, if people really understood that in your beautiful little child's body is, maybe 100 chemicals in there that can be detected, that, shouldn't be there. That if those kind of things are taught, now it's one thing to teach them that. Now what do you do about it? Well, there's votes to be made. It requires some knowledge that the consumer base doesn't have out there. That's no small task. But as did Rush Limbaugh educate his audience, the environmental community really and truly could educate their audience so that essentially, if I'm going to spend $60,000 out of my back pocket every year, and you all will do that as you get out into the world, and more or less, whatever the case might be, then our consumption habits are doing us in. So, business will come forth if a market is there. So that just says you got to teach consumers. Now, how do you teach consumers? Boy, that gets into a whole lot of discussion that we don't have the time for here, but that's critical. When I wrote this book, I knew darn well, we came out, that this was a cart before the horse. Because business you got to make money. And boy, I'm going to tell you, don't ever, any of you ever shrink away from making a profit. A profit is a perfectly noble aspiration. And you embrace the idea of a profit. And and a lot of environmental people aren't like that. And I'll tell you, a lot of the environmental community is not like that. I have given speeches in places where you could feel the electricity in the room because they don't want anything to do with business. And they're suspicious of me. I've walked this line all my career where the business community think I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm really an environmentalist talking the talk of business. And then on the other side, the environmentalists think I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm really a business guy trying to bamboozle them on the environmental stuff. But it's got to come together. Consumers are really the key. Now, the environmental entrepreneur or manager or what have you, investor, whole schmear, they can play a big role in educating their market. I mean, what is marketing? I make a widget out here, and I get my people cracking, and I want to create some demand for my product. Well, marketing is a marvelous educational tool, and particularly these days and times, any of you in the marketing business, boy, you ought to be able to make $1 zillion, a lot of money, doing really honest market-making activities as marketing folk. I have not answered your question.
Self-interest, how are you going to?
Well, I think what's in your self-interest is the key. I mean, you got to appeal. When we start appealing to, I want you to do the right thing, you got no ground to stand on. When you want to get business, everybody wants business to go out here and do something nice for the environment. They're going to do something nice with the environment, but they're not going to do much. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me. I understand the argument about the huge opportunity that the profit motive brings to these very deep ecological crises issues, but what is the change effort that's needed to convince folks who are making an awful lot of profit and an awful lot of money in dirty technologies or in perpetuating the status quo? And the status quo, which we're seeing, is clearly not acceptable moving forward. But how do you account for that change process that happens, in the way in which you can make a lot of money doing things that are not so good for the environment?
Great question. Now, I'm going to tell you, the big companies, I know a lot about business. One of the things I know about business, they're tough. They are tough guys. And they're not going to, the automotive industry isn't going to get into making 60-mile-an-hour cars up and down the line there when everything's geared up to make 20-mile-an-hour cars or 40-mile-an-hour. That seems to be the new thing. But it really doesn't matter what they think or what they do. If the market is there for an alternative to what it is they're doing that's causing the problems, they either will have to adjust or they'll disappear. Now, that's easy to say, but I was just talking earlier. There's a company, and I encourage you all to it'd be worth you looking at, is a company called Solar City out in California. You would expect that. Check out Solar City. Solar City has a companion program called Solar Strong. And it's a project that Solar City is doing with solar electricity for the U.S. Army. So they're going to put solar apparatus on the housing that soldiers and their families live in, 120,000 houses around the country on bases. Now, that was a dead duck. When Solyndra very famously fell under here and consumed several $100 million of American taxpayer money, and I frankly don't fault the president for that. I understand what was behind all that. But the next company in line to get a grant was this company, Solar City. Now, and I forget the numbers, but I think the numbers are $237 million. They were in line to get a U.S. Department of Energy grant to do this project. Essentially, they were going to come and put solar apparatus on the house and what have you, and then defray the cost of that material, and the people would only pay for the electricity they use, which makes that very palatable, and anybody can get into it. Well, so when Solyndra fell under, that grant went away. Merrill Lynch / Bank America stepped up and say, hey, we'll do that deal. We'll put up the money for that. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's huge. That is huge. I mean, Merrill Lynch, they're not in the business of, that's way too much public relations work right there. But what they realize is, look, we'll front end the money on these houses here. If it's $7,000, $10,000, we'll pay for it. And so the homeowner or the renter doesn't have to pay for it. So all they're going to have to pay for is the electricity they use. Well, the bean counters got back there, and they looked at the numbers, and heck, 7 years, we'll recoup our costs in this apparatus we put out here. And the lifespan of these things is 30 years. They ran the numbers. That's a great business deal. Now, that's coming down. That's the pricing formula that will break, in my estimation, the logjam on solar energy. 50 years for 50 years, solar is always going to be tomorrow's energy source. Now, what's that going to do? And I had a long purpose and all that. That's going to sweep the country, I bet you. That technology. Now, if I were a power company, including this wonderful one here and the big power companies in our state of Georgia, they'll get in that business. They'll get in the business of coming and knocking on the door and saying, hey, look, we want to do you a great deal here. We're going to come in here and we're going to put some solar apparatus on this thing. It's going to be really top stuff. We're going to heat your water, the whole schmear. You'll be hooked into the grid when the sun goes down or it gets shady or the batteries run out. You'll hook right into the grid, but your power bill will be way down. That's going to happen. Now, only reason that's not, it won't happen because somebody went and convinced the electric power companies to do that. The marketplace, a solar city, and all these people hacking around out there trying to find a way, how do I make this stuff work? Solar is space-age technology. It's great stuff. It's proven. You know, putting it in the grid system doesn't make any sense at all. I'm continually flabbergasted by people going to cover up a desert with solar panels and then put it in the grid system. So you put 100 pounds of electricity in one end of the wire and 2 ounces come out the other end. Well, that ain't going to work. You know, go down there and put it on the other end. So that's what's coming down. And so, in a way, it drives things. It won't, it doesn't matter what the coal industry or the electric power industry or the oil industry, anybody else. If the solutions are adopted and the marketplaces are bolstered, it'll happen, and these big players are not dummies. They'll switch into, they'll make an adjustment. Dean?
So it's been 20 years since your book came out, and I told you when we had lunch that you saw a lot of things coming that a lot of people didn't see coming back then. But I'm curious, in the ensuing 20 years, have you been encouraged or discouraged by the pace of change along the lines of what you talked about? These things are obviously a lot further along than they were when you wrote about them, but are they far enough along, or are you discouraged by our progress?
I am continually discouraged. I am clearly too optimistic, and I may be here so today, but I don't think so. It's laying out there. And what's really driving it, the two things I tried to bring out in my speech was the two things that are driving it is things have kind of fallen apart in our economy. And there's not a real good, clear way where we're going to go from here. Nah, it's a pretty good time to pivot and do some things. But really more dramatically, once the people begin to understand what all of this stuff means to them individually and to their children. And you know, you all, I mean, some of you here are older than 23 years old, and but you're all young, and you're going to have children. I'm going to tell you, boy, it offends me. I continue after this stuff. For 25 years, I've tried to walk away from this environmental stuff. It's cost me, I got to tell you. And there's a handful of people out there howling in the wilderness, and they're all gray-haired, and you know, they're all frustrated. But I've been blessed with 3 wonderful young children. I have a 19-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 23-year-old. And I wake up every morning angry. And that's the truth. I wake up every morning angry that, by gosh, we're not doing right by them. And they're pretty much the same age as you guys here. And I really, and I'm not making this stuff up. The kind of things that I just touched on here, that's really happening. You know, and people are not comfortable with it. It's doom and gloom. But honestly, we got to embrace the doom and gloom. So I think really and truly, and I think this is worth mentioning, I was at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention August 29th, 2005. I was a night journalism fellow, and I was there for 3 months and trying to marry my environmental expertise to public health. Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans, and the Center for Disease Control emptied out. Everybody went down there, and they couldn't get into the area because expecting every kind of communicable disease in the world to unfold. It did not. But I think that was a turning point in America. Because I think that was the first time, and you may not agree with me, but I think it was the first time that the people sat there on television and watched a great city get completely destroyed. And the government of the United States couldn't do a thing about it. Couldn't do a thing about it. I think from that point on, then you add in Fukushima and you add in all the floods and all the other things that have happened in that time. But I think that was the first time that I think a nervousness kind of emerged in the populace, particularly the adults, that, geez, you know, if this stuff really goes bad, there isn't a good answer for it. There isn't enough money. You know, we're a federal government and a state government and local governments. And Charlie senses it all the time, where the money isn't there anymore. Tax revenue isn't there. And so the combination of those two things, I think, make this time right. And I believe that this terrific university with this foundation under you, I think to close that remaining gap, I think is very doable. And I would encourage you, to, all of you as students and faculty and administrators, to go, I'm telling you, way down the road. But boy, I tell you, I think you got a heck of an opportunity to move into another area. Yes, ma'am.
As a follow-up to that, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the link between public health and environmental issues? Where's the business opportunity in finding the merger between the two of those?
As always, you know, I was at the Center for Disease Control, and I'm in there, and you know, I felt so sorry for those people. It was a curious 3 months time. You know, the Center for Disease Control exists at the beck and call of congressmen, and incredibly, there is a strong faction within the Congress of the United States that would do away with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I mean, I find that staggering. But it isn't staggering at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I'll tell you that. It makes them nervous all the time, so they got to be very careful on where they go. I got involved with a asthma project. I can remember the numbers. They had devoted $23 million to asthma prevention. And I'm thinking, $23 million? You know, there are companies that spend that much on wastebaskets. And, but it didn't have anything to do with prevention. It all had to do with treating the problem. They can't go to the prevention side. What causes asthma? It's pretty clear what causes asthma. You going to fight those guys? Not a chance. It ain't going to happen. This goes back to your question. So how do you marry the business side of that? I think the medical consequences of the way we live our lives on this planet, the way we in advanced economies live our lives, is killing us by tiny little cuts. And you can call it anything you want to, but that's the picture. So the business model is in cutting those things off and perhaps upping the money. Yes?
So is there any way to avoid putting a price on pollution?
No, you know, pollution, honestly and truly, we're a nation of free choice in order to remain that way. But, you know, if you persist in buying a 12-mile-gallon car or a truck or one thing or another, there needs to be, because all you're doing is sloughing the cost off on me. If the consumer understands that when that's a cost to all that, to that kind of pollution. So somebody's got to pay it, and I shouldn't have to pay it, and you shouldn't have to pay it, and my children surely shouldn't have to pay it. So yes, now it's going to take a lot of audacity and some really educated consumers to make that stick. And I am astounded, Dr. Dean touched on it, at the ignorance of the populace. And I love the populace, I am them. But honestly, truly, it's, I don't know why you wouldn't be, I don't know why there's not riots in the street. And we don't want riots in the street, but boy, we really got to do a better job of educating folks. And the carbon tax makes all sense in the world. When those kind of things start happening, I'm going to tell you, business is going to get better. What did I say about business earlier? It's tough. They're smart. If I can make a profit and I'm sloughing, you know, a lot of cost off on the public out there, and I can get away with it, and it's not a, you know, these are not bad people, but you know, it's a model that has been going on forever, And so if you start holding them accountable, they will change. It happens all the time. I remember doing a case study on DuPont. They were spending $70 million a year disposing of chemical waste. And EPA stuck some kind of restriction on it. This is back 20 years ago. And so some of their scientists got together and they turned it into another product and made $120 million on the deal. And saved $70 million they were disposing the stuff of. So I have said throughout this speech, we know how to solve these problems. There's very little that's new in environmental solutions. The problem is the people, the will of the people. And because government is not going to do it, big businesses are not going to do it, people got to stand up, and the business community has to be there, ready to go and to do some things. So there's where I feel like you guys are.
We might have time for one more. There's one more pressing question. Otherwise, we might wrap up. Any last questions?
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you for coming here for this presentation. My
Thank
name is Yu Han Wang. I'm actually an undergraduate sitting here. For me, I don't have much experience for the real business, but I just wonder, for my age, do you have any recommendation what we can do to support environment?
Well, golly day. You know, there is a wealth, a complete wealth of environmental organizations of every stripe. And any one of them could use somebody as bright and as talented as you. If the environment, here's a project for you. The environmental community, which is so fragmented and all over the place, if they took the lead as the vanguard in a consumer revolution, a quiet consumer revolution to create markets for environmental solutions, boy, I'm gonna tell you, this would happen so fast you couldn't believe it. And somebody in the leadership in the environmental community needs to pull together the parts and pieces of the environmental community out there to make them the lance head. Somebody's got to take the lead on this stuff. You know, nobody's environmentalist ought to drive up to an environmental meeting in a car that is a lie to what they're doing. And I'm not knocking, the great cars and the great houses and all those kind of things. There's just ways to come up with different kinds of great cars. I got to tell you, the automotive industry would not care if they were running full bore, making 60-mile-an-hour cars. They wouldn't care a bit. And we wouldn't care a bit. Be same number of jobs, same number of wealth, same number of tax revenue. So it's not like you have to get rid of them. You don't have to get rid of the coal industry. You don't have to get rid of the oil industry. But boy, they got to be damped back and take on a different role. That wasn't much of an answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Best of luck.